It's very nice to see so many people attending the event as one of the side events of the Asia Pacific Regional Review on the GCM. I really want to welcome you all very warmly today. And this is a co-organized panel discussion. We're very lucky to have a great group co-organizing, and we have the Royal Thai government, Boniji Monitoring, the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth, and the International Detention Coalition. And I'm also delighted to tell you that we have an excellent panel with us today. So I'm going to be calling on our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll explain a little bit more about the format of the panel discussion. So firstly, I would like to welcome Ten Tong Prasa Wagnich from the Royal Thai government.
Can you hear me now, right? Okay, thank you. My name is Tien Thong Prasan Phanit from Ministry of Social Development and Human Security, and today I'm very excited to sharing our experience in alternative to detention on children with you. And we also have the representative from Ministry of Foreign Affairs accompany me here in this meeting room. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and I will be calling you to the panel, Kumpu. So thanks, Kumpu, and welcome to everyone from the Royal Thai government. I would like to for our panelist Hayat Akbari to introduce himself from the UN Migration Group for Youth and Children, and Youth. Hayat, welcome.
Thanks, Carolina. Hi, everyone. My name is Hayat Akbari. I am the Asia Pacific appointed at the United Nations Major Group on Children and Youth, short form is UNMGCY, and great to see some familiar faces, and I really look forward to this discussion. Thanks.
Welcome, Hayat. And we also have Eve Lester from Boniji Monitoring.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Eve Lester. I'm the founding director of Boniji Monitoring, based in Melbourne, and we're developing technology for monitoring conditions of immigration detention.
Thanks, Eve. And then, last but not least, Vivian Chu from International Detention Coalition.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning. I'm Vivian from the IDC, and I'm the IDC's Asia Pacific Regional Coordinator based in Melbourne. Welcome to the session.
Thanks, Vivian, and thank you to all the panelists for the introduction. We really like to have a quite dynamic and engaging side event today. And the format, so that you understand, is that I will be asking a series of questions to the panelists, to different panelists, and that they will be answering. So we will try to make it dynamic that way. And then at the end, there will be some time for you to for questions and answers. So I encourage you to use the chat box for this purpose, and our panelists will be answering those questions that you are posting in the chat box. I also encourage you, if you want, to turn your videos on if you feel like, because these virtual events are good in the sense that they enable more participation from different places, which is good, but they take away a bit of the human element, which is always so nice. So if you feel like, please feel free to turn your videos on so we can feel more connected. What we're going to focus on today is the implementation of Objective 13 of the GCM, about using immigration detention only as a measure of last resort and working towards alternatives to detention, and specifically the commitment to end child immigration detention. So some of the questions of the panel discussion will be focused on ending child immigration detention. So this is about the format. So let's just start moving with the questions without further ado. So my first question is going to be for Kumpu from the Royal Thai government, and the question is, what progress has been made ending child immigration detention in accordance with Objective 13H. And the floor is yours.
The Royal Thai government would like to share our experience on the progress of the ATD. In order to put our efforts towards the efficient and effective implementation of ending child immigration detention, in 2019, Sovereign Ministry has signed the MOU on ATD. I have to say that the process of drafting the MOU was taken almost 2 years. It's quite very difficult how to collaborate among Sovereign Ministry in order to be agreed on the content of this MOU. And the MOU stipulates the responsibilities of the concerned authorities. It provides common guidelines to integrate procedures on non-detention of migration under the age of 18. Also, we developed the SOP under this MOU in order to link the mechanism between the Immigration Act and the Child Protection Act. It describes the procedures to protect children in immigration detention from the point of reception in the detention center to repatriation, where efforts are made to avoid separate of children from their parents also. Special consideration is given to vulnerable children such as unaccompanied children, children separated from their parents, children with UNHCR person of concerns, children who were victims of human trafficking and abuse, disabled children, and the children with health conditions. There are key principles of the SOP, which is I would like to focus that the children shall not be detained. It's like the main principle of this MOU ATD. And all decision making, the process is based on the best interest of the children. The children have the rights to adequate standard of living, and family-based care is the first priority, while our shelters is the last resort for child care arrangement. In order to determine and monitor and evaluate the implementation of the ATD, the multidisciplinary team has been established. It comprises IDC officer, competent officer under the Child Protection Act, and the representative from UNHCR, UNICEF, and IOM. Since late 2018 till now, a total of 238 children and parents has been benefit from this MOU. And right now, there are almost 90 children and 45 parents are placed back to their own community, while 30 children and 4 mothers are in our shelter, which most of them are unaccompanied minors. Also, since 2019, we also start a pilot project supported by UNICEF Thailand. We placed 1 staff, which the social worker, in order to screen the vulnerable children and families. It is like a cross-border management system. As of December 2020, 650 children were screened. Challenges in implementing MOU ATD still remain, and I would like just to focus just 2 main challenges. The first one is the bail fee for mother and guardians. The Immigration Act allows the competent officer to give permission to the alien to reside at any place with the condition to report the officer on the date and time and place as described. But in practice, the Immigration Bureau will only allow the mothers and guardians to be bailed out with the fee almost 105,000 USD. So this is quite a burden for the mother and the children, and also the GOs and NGOs to find the funding for the bail. And the second challenge is the limitation of service for migrant children. For example, the lack of human resources, especially the child protection social workers. a limited number of public and private shelters, which are specialized to taking care of the migrant children. Language barrier between officer and the migrants. Lack of appropriate interpreters and foster for the children, which for the foster care, I would like to maybe share and ask the IDC as well, how we develop the care arrangement for this group of children. And for the next step, we plan to do a lot of things, but I would like to just highlight 3 activities. The first one is the manual on case management procedures for social workers. The second one that we collaborate with the UN country team to develop the 3-day training workshop for social workers and the law enforcement. And the last one, the Royal Police Cadet Academy is now review the existing policy and procedures and practices of the Immigration Bureau regarding the protection of the migrant children, aim to finalize in this year. And we hope that this review will lead to the development of the protocol and reference manual on child-friendly treatment and procedures for Immigration Bureau in the future. And finally, I have to say that the constructive engagement and partnership between state, between UN agencies, civil society, will lead to effective and efficiency of the implementation of the ATD in Thailand and also in our region as well. Thank you, Back to you, Kun Carolina.
Thank you so much, Kumpu, and thank you so much for going into that detail about what is good practice in the region, which is the MOU in Thailand, and also for talking to us about the opportunities and the challenges that have come with it, and about the importance of implementing of how the Thai government is engaging different stakeholders, and I mean under really a whole of government and whole of society approach. So that is a very good start. I would like to move to Vivian Chu to ask that same question, and is the question on what progress has been made in ending child immigration detention in the region in accordance to 13H. So the floor is yours.
Thanks, Carolina. So I think in responding to that question, it's good to note that I think progress has really been quite uneven in the region. So we have heard from we've heard about the very important and very positive steps that Thailand has taken towards ending child immigration detention. We also know that the Indonesian government has stopped detaining children, both in practice as well as in policy, and that also the Japanese government has for several years now implemented a policy to avoid the immigration detention of children. But at the same time, we have seen the use of immigration detention increase in some countries in the region, such as in Malaysia, for example. At the regional level, we have seen some positive progress, as many of you will know, about the ASEAN Declaration on the Rights of Children in the context of migration, as well as the anticipated regional plan of action to implement this declaration. And so for those of you not so familiar with the declaration, ASEAN member states have agreed that in order to promote the best interests of the child, that they should develop effective alternatives to detention, and that they should ensure, where possible, children are kept together with their families in a non-custodial, a clean and a safe environment. And really, I think Thailand has been really instrumental in championing this declaration. I think it's important to reflect that, it does take time. It takes time to build these mechanisms, and it takes time to build the processes, not just to end child immigration detention, but also to ensure that children are supported and that they're protected in the community. I mean, we heard Kunpu talk about it just taking 2 years to actually draft the MOU. I think that in moving forward, there are a number of areas which all of us, all stakeholders can work together. We can work collaboratively and collectively on these areas across the region. And given time constraints, I'll just touch upon a few of them. So firstly, I think we really need to ensure that children are just never detained at all. Many of the pilots and many of the initiatives in the region have centered on the release of children from detention, which I think is understandable, and it's critically needed because children are in detention in the region. But we need to strive, I think, towards an approach where children are just never arrested and they're never detained in the first place. But instead, they are sent directly and immediately to community-based, rights-based alternatives. And secondly, we ultimately need to see a situation where national child protection authorities and NGOs play a much bigger role in responding to migrant children. We need to have better collaboration and better cooperation between immigration and child protection agencies, and to, I think, ultimately have child protection authorities assuming ultimate authority and ultimate responsibility for migrant children. For example, in some countries, once an immigration or police officer comes into contact with a child, they are required to refer them to child protection and social welfare agencies, who then work with NGOs to bring children into the folds of the national child protection system. So we need to really see in more countries this better mainstreaming of child protection and child well-being across all government agencies. And lastly, I think it's also the right time now for us to begin work on law reform so that child immigration detention is prohibited in our national laws. Many of the positive developments across the region that we have seen are not cemented in formal laws, but they are in policies, which, depending on the national legal system, can have a varying effect. But what we have seen, not just in the region, but globally, is that when things are not in the formal legal system, when they're not in the law, the legislation, they can really risk being implemented in a very uniform way. Or they can also risk being reversed. So if the government changes and priorities changes, then often the policies can be quickly dismantled. Whereas if they are in law, we see much longer, much more sustainable and structural changes. I think I'll stop there and hand back to you, Carolina. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian, and thanks for giving us such a good overview of what is going on in the region, and also looking at what sort of measures need to be implemented and what has been the kind of development, both in terms of different countries, but also in terms of regional instruments, etc., and what could happen in the future. I would like to move to Hayat, to a question for Hayat from the UN Major Group for Children and Youth. And Hayat, the question is, how has COVID-19 affected your views or your experience or practice in relation to immigration detention and the GCM commitment to find alternatives? And the floor is yours.
Can you hear me, Carolina?
Yes, we can hear you, Hayat. Go ahead.
Thanks. I sincerely apologize. I have some internet problems.
Oh, sorry, you're doing well.
Thanks for the question. Yeah. Good. Thanks for the question. I think one thing which is clear is that the COVID-19 put danger and risk on everyone. We all have in this room and everyone worldwide have experienced and have seen that the impact of COVID-19 on everyone. But I think it has had a significant impact on asylum seekers and migrants detained in detention worldwide. And the already traumatized detainees, as we all know, eat and sleep in crowded halls, and also share bathrooms. I think also that one lesson that we all have learned from the lockdown experience of COVID-19 is that we all are in this together, and it had a huge impact on our mental health issue. I also think it's time for us all in this room and other advocates worldwide to fight for a world without putting someone in detention for crossing the borders. And also with that message, I will also say it's time to say no to detention of asylum seekers and migrants. Thanks, Carolina.
Thank you so much, Hayat, and thank you specifically for really for talking about the effects on detention on people and what it means at the human level, and also on highlighting the issue that we are in this together. I really like the way you have framed that. And it's also important to see that in terms of the progress that has been done in the region and what else could be done. So thank you for that. I would like to go back to Kung Pu, with regards to the question that of how has COVID-19 affected the GCM commitment to find alternatives and to end child immigration detention. So back to you, Kumpu.
Thank you. Actually, I would like to respond to Kun Vivian's opinion on, I agree that the children must not bring to the detention. So in Thailand, we have Child Protection Act. It means that if the police has found or arrest the children, instead of bringing them to the detention center, the children must be transferred to the Child Protection Agency, which means the Ministry of Social Development and Human Security. This means that we have to work more with the police agencies. And for responding to your question, I think when we have so many challenges about how to solve the COVID-19 pandemic, but for the government of Thailand, especially on the ATD work, we found the opportunity how to strengthen the procedures, how to bring the children out from the detention center. The guideline on management on COVID-19 in correction and detention facility was established by Department of Disease Control, Ministry of the Public Health, and there are the measures for the immigration officers, detainees, including those visitors, how to manage themselves during the COVID-19 in IDC. To strengthen the protection of the children while they are in the IDC, Department of Children and Youth, in collaboration with the Immigration Bureau and UNICEF Thailand, developed the guidance for protection children in immigration detention center. We hope that this guideline also in line with the SOP ATD and emphasis more the child-sensitive procedures. With the strict border control, there were less migrants, besides with amnesty for those travel documents expired during those periods. The Thai government extended their temporary stay in Thailand, thus less new cases were placed in immigration detention center. The COVID-19 pandemic provides an opportunity to immediate being addressed the long-standing issues for overcrowded in place of the immigration detention center. However, the prevention, the spreading of epidemic sometimes led each process under SOP took longer period. Along with the strict social distance measures, reduce the capacity of service provider, especially in government shelters. However, we found that this is quite an opportunity for us to determine measures on ATD by using family-based care and community-based care arrangement, rather than being placed children and mothers in the shelters or in the detention center.
Thank you, Kumpu, again for a quite comprehensive response in terms of COVID-19, and you were starting to talk about ATDs. So my next question has to do with that. Just before I go into my next question, I want to remind everyone that you can post your questions or your comments on the chat. Please start doing, because when we finish the questions for the panelists, it will be wonderful to have some input from all of you that have generously given their time to attend this panel discussion. So Kumpu, you were starting to talk about alternatives to detention, and my question to you is, do you consider that ATDs or alternatives to detention are a better public policy choice? And if that's the case, why do you consider this to be the case? And I want Hayat and Eve also to answer this question later, but we start with Kumpu.
Okay, thank you, Carolina. There's so many questions to Thailand. Okay, I think if all states already ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the ATD maybe will the procedures to reconfirm your commitments on the CRC. Okay, and I think I do believe that the children has the rights to be in the community with their families. And I do believe that the community-based ATD will reduce the reliance on detention. Effective management in the community is also more likely to respect other fundamental civil, political, economic, cultural, and social rights. Therefore, contributing to all migrants' well-being and self-sufficiency. The respect for fundamental human rights therefore allows individuals to contribute fully to society if residency is secure or to better face difficult futures such as the possibility of return. Community-based ATD has shown to maintain high compliance rate with range of migrant population, in particular when migrants are able to meet their basic needs and are able to access legal and social support necessary to make informed decisions about their migration journey. In contrast, prolonged and unnecessary detention has been found in some contexts to be counterproductive to government objectives of achieving compliance with immigration outcome, including returns. To reaffirm our commitment as a state party to CRC to protect the rights of the children and to ensure that best interest of the child is primary consideration in all relevant policy and practices. The National Child Protection Strategy includes strategy on establishment, the mechanism to monitor effective access of the children in the context of migration to national child protection system. This means that we try to develop the local child protection system, which the migrant and also the Thai children also can access to the basic needs and also to be protected in our Child Protection Act as well. For the ASEAN level, as Khun Vivian already told you about the ASEAN Declaration in the rights of the children in the context of migration, and Thailand very would like to welcome the ASEAN country to put our efforts to implement this declaration. And right now we are trying to draft the regional plan of action, and we hope that we will finish this year. But for Thailand, we will not wait for the regional plan of action. We already implement some of the activities in order to protect the migrant children as well. Thank you, Carolina.
Thanks, Kumbu, and thank you also for the patience in answering all the questions and answering them so comprehensively. Thanks for highlighting the CRC, the importance of child protection, and the fact that Thailand is actually going ahead of kind of the regional recommendations, which is very good to hear. I'll move on to Hayat, and the question is, Hayat, it's the same question from your experience. Are alternatives to detention a better public policy choice? And if so, why do you think that?
Thanks, Carolina, for your question. I think that the very straightforward answer to this question is yes. And I will say this as clearly mentioned in Objective 13 of GCM document. It states that the detention of migrants should be used, and I quote, only as a last resort and to work towards alternatives. And it's a very welcoming and also a great steps that states such as Thailand is taking for alternatives to detention. But I do believe that there still work needs to be done for the rights of children in detention and to make alternatives to detention. Instead of putting them migrants and asylum seeker children in detention. Also, I also firmly believe that the alternatives to detention is not just a better policy for governments to reduce their spendings, but it also saves migrants and refugees, migrants and asylum seekers from suffering from mental health and PTSD and many other illnesses which caused by the experience of detention during the period of time that they're detained. And I say this, and also I say these things based on my own personal experience of being detained in detention for almost a year. And I didn't, during this period of time, I didn't get access to speak to my mom for almost 3 months because of the restriction put by authorities on detainees. And also because of that experience of detention that I had, or I went through, I was suffering, and I suffered after I was released into community, and also after I was resettled, and the experience of PTSD I had experienced after I started my education after my resettlement in a third country. So yes, of course, it's no doubt a very straightforward answer, but it is a better public policy, not just from a government point of view, also for the better and in order to provide all those impact and negative impact. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Hayat, and particularly for your courage and really for your leadership in raising these issues and in bringing in the human aspect to this conversation, which I think is the most important aspect without doubts, and also for making the links in between the mental health aspects, which are aspects that certainly need to be highlighted because they are present in almost every experience of detention. So thanks for that. I move to Eve with the same question. Eve, what do you think alternatives to detention are a good public policy choice, and if that's the case, why?
Thanks, Carolina, and thank you, Kunpu and Hayat, for the really useful contributions, I think, to this responses to this question. So I think I think really the key things are that alternatives to detention are a better public policy choice because of the harm. Hayat has highlighted that very strongly, and Kunpu has noted it as well, especially in terms of children. Obviously, there are massive costs involved in immigration detention, and it is a less costly response, migration management response. But I think it's really important to highlight that the highest costs are for the people who are in immigration detention. So it's the human costs, it's the financial costs, and then there are, of course, societal costs, because it reflects, I think, very significantly on the society more broadly. So I think most of us would agree that that they are a good idea. I think COVID-19 has certainly highlighted that alternatives to detention are also a better public health choice because of the extreme vulnerability of people in the context of COVID-19. What I wanted to just focus on is about the choice element of this. So is there a choice about having alternatives to detention? Or is there a legal foundation for alternatives to detention that creates an obligation? And the short answer to that question, I think, is certainly yes. So a person can only be detained after less coercive and intrusive measures have been found not to be suitable in an individual case. And what that creates is an obligation to consider alternatives to detention in the decision-making process. So we need to recall that detention must be exceptional, a measure of last resort. I know others have mentioned this already. It must have a legitimate aim, be necessary, reasonable and proportionate, and be subject to review. And if we take that approach, what we can see is that the inquiry about alternatives to detention provides us with a robust way of ensuring that immigration decisions incorporate the necessary safeguards, or immigration detention decisions incorporate the necessary safeguards. So in other words, consideration of alternatives to detention is embedded in the most effective decision-making processes. As Kun Pu has noted, this is especially important for people who are vulnerable in a detention environment, not least but not only families and children. And in the case of children, we've had important references to the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the requirement that detention should be a last resort and in the best interests. And also that the best interests of the child must be a primary consideration. And I think it's really important for us to remember that the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has actually gone even further than that to say immigration detention of children should be prohibited because it can never be in the best interests of the child. And of course, the GCM Objective 13 is obviously clear. So the law should provide for alternatives. Alternatives are a practical way of safeguarding human rights. And in terms of the different forms of which alternatives can take, obviously there is release into the community. Many of us already know what those examples might be. But I think that so support through case management models and so on. I won't go into that detail, but I think it's really important to remember that, as Kun Pu has noted just earlier, that there's a very high compliance rate. And that's a really important thing for us to remember and highlight. And also that the fact that alternatives to detention themselves, and this has been noted too, must be governed by human rights standards, because the way in which alternatives are implemented have human rights implications. I think I've probably said enough at this stage, and I'll pass it back to you, Carolina.
Thanks, Eve, and thank you so much for highlighting so many dimensions, including the legal dimension, the cost issue, public health, and making all those connections, which are very, very useful. I would like now to move to Vivian with that same questions, exactly the same questions. Actually, what I would like to do is to elaborate a bit more on what, like, we're talking about alternatives to detention. We have heard from the panel why the panel considered this is a good public policy choice, but let's elaborate further on the same question, and is what are the minimum requirements that you think are of an ATD program to be effective, and how do you think that best practice should look like? So the floor is yours, and then maybe we could come back to Eve for that same question so that you could elaborate further on that. And I'm very pleased to see that there are some questions in the chat, so we will follow with that. So the floor is yours, Vivian.
Thanks, Carolina. I think I'll start off by just talking about some of the findings from our global program of research. And these findings are summarized in our handbook, There Are Alternatives, and we'll just pop the link in the chat. And send that already, thank you. For those of you who haven't had a chance to look at our publication yet. And really through this global research, we found that the more effective alternatives had a few core elements, and I'll run through some of these very quickly. Firstly, to say that in terms of defining effective, we looked not just at well-being of people in alternatives, but we also looked at things which other panelists have already touched on. So the cost benefits, as well as the ability of programs to actually ensure that people are engaged in the ATD and, for example, didn't disappear. So we looked at compliance rates, which Eve has already mentioned. And really what we found was that the most effective alternatives are those that really involve robust screening and assessment of individuals. We're all diverse people with different backgrounds, different intersectional experiences, different motivations, and strong screening and referral systems really just help authorities to respond more appropriately and more effectively to people, based not just on their personal vulnerabilities, but also on their strengths. And these strengths could include, for example, their ties to the community. I'm going to just plug another IDC tool here. We'll put it into the chat box. This is our vulnerability screening tool, and it's a tool which we developed jointly with UNHCR. And this tool is essentially to just guide frontline workers and to guide decision makers in doing screening and assessments in the context of migration procedures and, excuse me, and migration systems. We also found that effective alternatives are those that really build trust and engagement with people in the program, and that in contrast, alternatives that were focused on punishment, on enforcement and control tended to be much less effective globally. Unsurprisingly, alternatives that ensured fundamental rights were respected and needs were met were also more effective. And where alternatives involved the use of conditions, for example, reporting requirements or the use of bail, the ones that were really the most effective were ones that used conditions which were proportionate, which were not so onerous and so difficult that they made it difficult for people to comply with them. And lastly, effective alternatives were also ones that were linked to some form of case resolution. So for example, in the case of migrants, if alternatives were linked to their ability to voluntarily and to safely return back to their countries of origin, these were often the most effective programs, or to provide them with an opportunity to remain legally in that country. I think really, the main reflection here is that alternatives are most effective when they're centered on rights-based community models, and where they're implemented, as we've seen in Thailand, in partnership between government, UN agencies and NGOs. It really isn't enough that people are not detained. We also need to make sure that programs are put in place for them while their migration status is being resolved, and that these are rights-based and they're community-based. For children and families in particular, I think Kampu has touched upon this quite a few times, but really shelters should be the last resort. We do want to avoid the institutionalization of children, and we also want to make sure that where shelters are used, they're really on a very short-term, very temporary basis. And I think these community care case management models in Thailand, done in partnership between government and civil society, are a really good example of how we can move forward. And also critically, we need to make sure that families aren't separated. We know that children suffer when they're taken from their parents or their guardians, and that research globally has shown that the impact of that family separation that impact actually can have, it can cause so much damage to children, and that can be just as bad as the impact of detention itself. I think I'm out of time, so I'm going to hand back to you, Carolina. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian, and thanks specifically for highlighting in such a practical manner how alternatives to detention programs should look like, and specifically the issue of the importance of them being rights-based and community-centered, which I think is the key. I'll move on to Eve for this same question. It's a question about what is best practice in terms of alternatives to detention, Eve, and after this we will start with the questions that we are seeing in the chat. So the floor is yours, Eve.
Thank you, Carolina. So what I'm going to do is rather than run through the standards, what I want to do is give you a little demonstration of a tool that Boniji has developed so that we can all look up the standards, the minimum requirements and best practice standards that apply to alternatives to detention and other aspects of immigration detention. So I'm just going to share my screen and then run through a brief demonstration with you. Okay, I'll probably seek confirmation that you can see the screen. Can you see the screen?
We can, Eve.
Yes, you can. Okay. And is it the Boniji homepage?
It is.
Yes. Excellent. Okay. Very good. So this is essentially a short demonstration of the Immigration Detention Standards Navigator, which we've developed, which is a free, dynamic and easy way to search and navigate the international detention standards and best practices that apply to people in immigration detention. So we start on the Boniji homepage and we'll click first on the Standards Navigator. So here you will find a short description of what the Navigator is, why we have developed it, who it is for, tips for users, some observations about COVID-19 relevant standards, and an invitation to give us feedback. So when we open the navigator for the first time, there is a brief questionnaire to help us understand who our users are. So note here that all identifying questions are helpful to us, but they are optional for you. So now that we're in the navigator, note the invitation to bookmark the page to avoid being asked to complete the questionnaire when you return. So let's look at two examples. Let's select alternatives to detention. So here we'll find 15 key indicators. That is, the things that we should expect to find in an effective ATD program. So in our results, let's take a look at indicator 6.03. Alternatives to detention and the consequences of non-compliance with conditions are provided for by law or lawful regulation and are subject to meaningful, enforceable and independent periodic review, and non-citizens understand them. Okay, so here we find the key indicator, and below it are the international standards and best practice that underpin the indicator. So you can see we have the instrument, the provision, and its text. So let's scroll down to the GCM references. Here you'll see references to Objective 13 and applicable text. And you'll also find a link to the GCM. So each of these instruments takes us to the relevant instrument. So we'll scroll back up and we'll reset our search. Okay, so this time we can search for package of alternatives. Package of alternatives, search. Okay. So this time we'll choose 6.05, indicator 6.05. And you'll see again that this includes applicable standards below. You'll also see that it's a COVID relevant indicator. So there's a button here which reminds you that it's a COVID relevant indicator. And it also means that if you're interested in other COVID relevant indicators, then you can click on this COVID button and go to the full list. Okay, so you'll see that all of those indicators are COVID relevant. So I'll conclude the demonstration for now, but what I hope is that you'll take a look at this tool in your own time, and we hope that you'll find the navigating both interesting and helpful. Okay, I'll sign off there and unshare my screen.
Thanks, Eve, and thank you so much for taking us through this practical demonstration of the navigator that I think is very useful for everyone to be able to see it, and it's good that it's being shared in the chat so that everyone can follow. There are some questions just before we finish in the chat, so I'm going to start asking the questions to the panelists. We don't have a lot of time, but hopefully we can get through them. Let's see how we go. The first one is from Brian Barber from Act for Peace and the Kaldor Center for International Refugee Law, and is for Kumpu, for the Thai government. And the question is, to what extent did you engage with other ASEAN member states on the declaration and a possible regional plan of action, and what convinced or motivated states to join such a declaration? So, Kumpu. I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. To respond to the first question from Brian, I think the process of the drafting the ASEAN declaration, normally we will set up the working group, which are from the representative from the some SWOT ASEAN member state. And after that, we will do the like a national consultation in ASEAN country, and then we will get all the recommendation or suggestion and gathering all data to be like for the finalized the draft of declaration, and then the declaration already adopted in the ASEAN Summit Leader in 2019. So right now we are in the process of drafting RPA. This means that in your country, the ministry who already respond for the children in the context of migration will organize the national consultation in your country. And then we also collect all the recommendation again, and then go back to the working group. Okay. And for if you would like to follow up what the ASEAN has been doing, and you would like to engage how the ASEAN is moving forward on the protection of the rights of the children in the context of migration, you can join our side event, which Thailand will organize today at 12:30. And maybe I would like the organizer maybe to send the flyer. So everyone, if you would like to join, you can link to this event at 12:30.
Thanks, Kumpu, for the good answer, and also for raising the issue of the side event. So we will try to post the information of the side event on the chat so that others can join. I'll move on to the question from Elana Wong from the UNMGCY. And this question I will direct it to Hayat. The question is, for child migrants who have already experienced or are currently in detention, what support, psychosocial or economic, can and should be provided once they are released or transferred to alternatives, and how much of this exists currently outside of smaller scale grassroots support? Hayat.
Thanks, Elena, for your question. Look, I think from my own personal experience, and I refer these things because of based from my own personal experience, I think one of the supports that every detainee, I mean, again, detention should not be the case in first instance. And if that is the case, and I think what is important is after they are released is the psychological support, which is, and as I mentioned before, myself, after detention, I had mental health issue, which I had to go through psychological therapy, and so that I can be a normal person because of the impact that it had on psychology. And I think mental health and also mental health is the foundation for every individual's well-being, and also it is also an affecting which help them to function, actively function in the community that they live. And I think the second point is around the improvement of the relationship with the family, and also the friends, trying to make that environment as a family as they can, also to try to connect them.
Hayat? I think we might have lost Hayat. He was saying before that he had some internet connections. I think he's trying to come back. Hayat?
Can you hear me? Sorry, as I said,
yes,
I have some
we can hear you.
connection.
Good that you came back.
I just want 30 more seconds sometime. Also as I said, improve the relationship with their family and friends, but also the other thing is the point around integration of the family in the host community and the host country that they're going to be resettled, or they are already released. So Yeah, I mean, psychological support, but also the point around integration once they are released in the community, and they are. So those are my points. Thanks, Carolina. And just a point of how many of these services are available. I can't speak on behalf of other countries, but the country that I'm based in, Australia, most of these services are available. I mean, once people are in the future or in the past, and the people were released in detention, these services were available, psychological and also community-based helps that are needed, also the improvement of relationship with the family, and also integration. And I can't speak for other countries because I'm not aware of this. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hayat, for that. And we have very little time. I'm just going to go for the last question and then pass on to Eve to close the panel discussion. The last question is from Pepe from IOM Regional's office, and she says that, as Vivian mentioned, progress on NTD in the region is uneven. So what are good entry points to further this conversation in the region in a way that governments find it helpful? Vivian.
Okay, yeah, I think just given that we're running out of time, I'll just speak to one thing that we have been doing at IDC, and that's been in collaboration with the Asia Dialogue on Forced Migration. So I think we recognize that it takes time to build these systems and processes, and sometimes it's also a matter of knowledge and capacity. And so we have started this regional peer learning platform, where governments from different countries in the region have come together to share their experiences in implementing alternatives and moving away from child immigration detention. So Thailand and Kunpu has been also part of this process, as well as the governments of Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and Australia has also been involved. And I think what's been really helpful is that it's really involved people from the implementation level, so not necessarily just the policy level, but people who are really kind of grappling with how to create these systems, how to actually put in these processes in place at the national level. And it's been a space for people to share what they've learned, what hasn't worked, and the sorts of challenges that they're experiencing. So I think that's one way to really support that sort of implementation level knowledge.
Thanks, Vivian. Kunpu, do you want to add something to this before we pass it to Eve to close?
To respond to, I think, Brian's question, and also respond to Hayat about the psychosocial support. Thailand agreed that the psychosocial support for the migrant is quite very important, because we found that after we place children in a community, all of them are really has like a mental health issues. And in Thailand, not only state has the obligation to send the social worker to help them, we also open for the UN agencies and CSO also to provide the psychosocial support for them. Okay. And for the monitoring, the ASEAN declaration on the CCM, I can say CCM, under the draft of RPA, we have set up the ACWC and some SWOT to be the mechanism for the monitoring. And I think that in the draft, we set up like 2 years for the reviewing the advancement of this work among the ASEAN country. So I would like just to end up my response right now.
Thanks, Kunpu, and I'll pass the floor to Eve in case she wants to reflect on this, and also to close the panel discussion. And thank you to everyone and to the panelists.
Thank you, Carolina. So my reflection on that point will be very brief, and it's just the importance of collecting really good, rigorous data as an evidence base to assist with comparative analysis about different state practices and the learnings that can come from that. But really, at this stage in the session, it's my great pleasure to extend thanks to all the panelists, to the Royal Thai Government, Kunpu, thank you very, very much, to Hayat for your amazing insights and knowledge. To Viv for all of your rigorous and useful insights, and of course to Carolina for her moderation, her expert moderation. Now, behind the scenes, there are a lot of people who organise these events, and I want to specifically recognise the incredible team at IDC, Min, Mick and Mialia, as well as Ilana from UNMGCY. Also the staff from the Royal Thai Government, because I also know that they've put a lot of effort in as well. Thank you to the participants, because no session is a session without the participants, and it's been great to have your questions. What I would like to do is invite those of you who are willing to do so to put on your screens and to just give a wave of thanks to humanize the end of our session, and to look forward to strengthening our work on alternatives to detention in the region. Hooray, there you all are. Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day, and we'll see you this evening. Bye.